Hello everyone, welcome to the Sega Saturn Shiro podcast, the only podcast that can get your Saturn into the node of Skynet. With me are my guests Dave and Kay. So, what have you guys been up to, Dave?
Not much. I was looking forward to this podcast and our interview a little bit later in the cast. Just talking to those guys and trying to hook up with them during the week. A Sega RPG fan, and it's still thinking 1999. We're going to have them on, and I'm excited about that. And then other than that, I've just been playing a hell of a lot of Dragonforce. It was a game that I acquired recently, and it's such an awesome game, and I've kind of just gone real deep into Dragonforce, and I've been putting in about an hour every morning, just working my way up the map, and I'm pretty much a force to be reckoned with now. So
why a Dragonforce?
Chaz Picardi on the Sega Saturn Collectors of America group on Facebook, he posted this really good video tutorial. He kind of live streamed it on Facebook, and it kind of got me thinking, okay, maybe I will give this game another shot, because honestly, my previous experience, maybe once a year I fire it up and I look at the first domestic affairs, thing, and I kind of go through the menus, and then I am looking at that kind of intimidating map, with all the different castles and not knowing what the hell I'm supposed to do. And being a lazy person, I've never really open that manual. Well, actually, to be fair, I've only had a burn copy of the game until recently, so I didn't really ever have the manual.
Okay.
And rather than kind of looking up that information, I just was thinking, I could just figure this out by just figuring it out, but it didn't work that way. So anyway, Chaz, he posted up a really good video that inspired me to give it another shot. And it was a really good tutorial, and it got me like the first few hours into the game that really got me past that wall of intimidation. And then once you get into that game, it completely redefined like my top 10 list for the Saturn. The sprite work is amazing. The fact that there can be like 100 character sprites, 200 character sprites for each army, on screen at the same time. And the Saturn hardly slows down. There are some spots like with the dragons and the zombies where there's so much animation going on that the Saturn does chug a little bit, but it definitely lives up to what everybody says about it.
Cool. What about you, Kay? What have you been up to?
I got an STV board and a reproduction cart for Radiant Silvergun and Shinryu for STV.
Oh, nice. You gonna super gun that?
Well, I got a pair of candy cabs, so I'm hoping I can get them running on my actual candy cabs before I super gun it. But
nice. Yeah. I'd love to see it. Send me some pics of the board. I might want to do something like that later on.
Yeah, for sure. Other than that, really, the biggest thing is where a few podcasts ago, we went ahead and released ARM to the public, being an unreleased game. Looks like my friend Don might have sold another unreleased prototype that he's had. It was a port of Crime Patrol, originally on the 3DO and also ported to the Sega CD. A little known fact, it was also ported to the Saturn and just never was published. So I made a dump of that game, and I actually have a lot of prototypes from Don that I'm going to be dumping over the course of the week. Not any other unreleased games, we've already dumped those, but a couple of previous versions, including some Street Fighter and things of that nature.
Nice, cool, and we'll all be looking forward to that.
How about you, Pat?
Actually, today I just got done setting up a King of Fighters tournament. It was for King of Fighters 98. I set up my super gun and my PVM, and yeah, we all played some King of Fighters. About a good turnout, about 24 people playing it, and we had a great time. In terms of Saturn stuff, though, mostly just playing the obscure game, which we'll get into, and playing a lot of again, trying to get good at the shmups. I'm not great at them, so it takes me forever, but still hacking away at Batsugun. And actually, I put in Game Paradise because I saw the game's going to be released on the PS4 soon. So I was like, let's give it a shot. So and I blow as worse as I remember I did that game. But man, is that game fun! Fun.
That's speaking phenomenal. Of shmups that came out recently on other platforms, Battle Garega was released a couple of weeks ago. Same day, I think, as Cuphead. But I know that it made it out to the Xbox Live Arcade.
So, oh, nice.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys will go pick that up.
Yeah. Before we get into our obscure game, I wanted to make mention of something. This podcast is going to be primarily dedicated to something fairly technical, networking on the Saturn. And we've gone back and forth about how technical of a podcast we are, and whether or not we're too technical. And we like to hear you guys' feedback. So this is a lot sooner than I think we wanted to have a technical one, but the opportunity to interview these gentlemen came about fairly quickly, and it just seemed right. Plus, we really want to promote the idea of getting together as a community and playing some of these games on Netlink. So I will take some responsibility for how drony I can be with technical stuff, and thank you guys for bearing with it.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, we interviewed the guys that were working on the Sega Saturn Netlink connection using the VOIP. So we talked to them, had a couple questions, had a little nice Q&A. And that'll be later on the podcast.
So that brings us to our obscure game of the cast.
All right, and did you want to introduce that, Kay? I know you're a big fan of the said game.
So this is a series of games, technically. It's a Gundam Side Story, 1, 2, and 3, collectively known as the Blue Destiny. So you can see it either as individual games or as that collective. And it is one of the first HK bootlegs I've ever owned, HK Silvers. So they are the one that the HK Silvers that I picked up was Side Story 2 and 3, and they have discard on them, but they won't boot without a mod chip, or in this case pseudo is possible as well now.
Dang, that's strange.
But, yeah. But they were sold in Hong Kong, which is why they were called HKs. And it was one of the first games that I had gotten after I got my Saturn. It was Tomb Raider, Virtual On, Fire Pro Wrestling, and then those 2 side story games. I'd like to hear if you guys have had any experience with, what your guys' experience with this game was.
All right. Well, I actually remember seeing a bunch of threads about it when I was looking into the Saturn stuff, and I'd like to say I'm a moderate fan of Gundam. I've watched it here and there, and I watched it a lot growing up. So I mean, there's a no-brainer to pick it up. But I actually saw it. I saw it at a convention when this Game On Expo last year, and I picked up 1 and 2, and it's a blast. I mean, the gameplay's a lot of fun. The story I can't really understand that well, but I mean, it's all about the run and gun Gundam stuff at the end of the day, and I think it's really fun. I don't know about you, Kay, though.
But Dave, do you have any experience with it yet?
Only, I'm familiar with it. I've watched some Gundam. To be honest with you, I watched some YouTube reviews, and I've also, was looking at just some gameplay. It reminds me visually, gameplay-wise, it reminds me of Gun Griffin. I don't know if I'm too far off by making that comparison, but it looks like it's a lot of fun. I love the Gun Griffin games, both 1 and 2, so it's definitely something that I'm excited about. And because this week I've just been so busy, I haven't had a chance to burn a copy and give it a shot or plug it into an emulator. But I did watch the Project Co video on YouTube. He did a really good job reviewing it, and it seems like it's actually a really solid game, or both of them.
So for me, I never had any experience with Side Story 1. I do have both sets now complete, like originals, but when I first got my Saturn, all I had was Side Stories 2 and 3. And how I acquired them and why I started playing them and why I love them is because there still is this website forum called Game Trading Zone. and I was interested in Saturn and wanted to get everything for Virtual On. It was actually, one of the primary reasons for me getting into the Saturn in the first place. And you have in Japan the twin sticks, just like they had for Virtual On in the arcade. So I went ahead and tried to find a set of the twin sticks, and this guy sold it to me or traded to me from Game Trading Zone, and included the 2 HKs for Side Stories 2 and 3, because the twin sticks are usable on Gundam Side Story 2 and 3.
That's pretty cool.
I know it's a side note, but is it also usable in Gun Griffin?
I have not tried to use it. I think it might be. But
actually, there is a stick icon on the back of the Gun Griffin box.
Oh, cool. Well,
so it might be the mission stick. I don't know if that's the mission stick or the twin sticks, but
well, I'll grab a twin stick and I'll let you guys know.
You just go to grab a twin stick.
Yeah, but what do you guys think? Would you recommend it? Not recommend it?
Before we move there, Gun Griffin 2 does apparently support the twin stick.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited about it. It's now on my radar, and I'm definitely going to get into playing it and see if it's something that I want to pick up for my collection, for my import collection. But yeah, I recommend, based on what I've seen, and I love the Gun Griffin games, I'm all up for more of that.
Yeah, and obviously I'm a fan of anything that lets me break out those twin sticks, since there's so little software that actually really utilizes them.
Sure. I actually learned that the twin sticks are literally just 2 arcade sticks with buttons that are bound up to it. I thought that was really cool. So, I mean, technically, I saw forums of people wanting to make their own, and I thought that was really interesting.
They're also digital, 100% digital, and they map out to the Saturn pad exactly. So theoretically, you could tear a controller apart and put different triggers onto it, to make your own, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, I might be trying my hand at that, like getting a broken stick and just modding it.
The hardware on this thing, the base, I believe, is the same base as the later version of the Virtua Stick. Right. So you could take that same base, just remove the twin stick section, and pop on the later version, the arcade style Virtua Stick, and just swap them.
That would be so cool if you made it so it was like modular, so you could swap out the Virtua Stick module and then swap in the twin stick module.
That'd be a little bit more difficult because of the way the micro switches are set up, but yeah, that'd be interesting.
So anyway, that's our obscure games for this podcast.
Just game in this case, though.
Well, there's 2 side stories.
There's 3 side.
Oh yeah, that's right.
3. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, cut that out, please. Cut out my ignorance.
Cool.
It's all good. All right, so that kind of brings us into our primary topic, which is networking on Sega consoles in general, but the Saturn specifically. Dave, you want to talk about Sega being kind of a pioneer for this?
Yeah, well, in my experience, Sega has always been kind of just ahead of their time. And for better or for worse, it's kind of,
It's been their MO.
It's been their MO, and it's gotten them into some trouble, because the public, the consumer public, hasn't always been kind of on the same page. But they were really wanting to push online connectivity, seems like all the way back from the Mega Drive. And they started out with the Sega Channel, which is basically offering games, piped into a RAM cart that would sit on top of the Genesis, and that way you could basically rent games or try games, kind of like GameFly, or kind of like Netflix for games, back in the early 90s.
And the cool thing is that exclusive games, like I know, for example, 2 examples are Pulsar. Is it Pulsar, the game that was made by the Game Freak, and Mega Man: The Wily Wars? Mm-hmm. No, Pulseman. Sorry, Pulseman is the name of it.
And there was even, I feel like there was even a special version of Shining 4. Maybe it was a demo, or it was like a special version. But anyway, I don't want to get too deep in that. I just, the point is, Sega has always been just a little bit ahead of their time, and they followed suit onto the Saturn and then onto the Dreamcast, where they ultimately met their demise. But I know they were responsible for getting me personally into online gaming with PSO on the Dreamcast.
And then possibly inspiring, the Xbox to be online as well.
Absolutely. I mean, Microsoft had a relationship with Sega and was embedded CE in the Dreamcast, and a lot of people speculate that the Xbox was pretty much like Dreamcast 2.0 or Dreamcast 1.5. But that's more speculation. But the truth is, Sega really did pioneer online multiplayer console gaming, and that was a part of my youth. I did miss out in the Saturn days. I didn't have a Netlink. It was actually really expensive when it came out, and it only had support for 5 games. So as a kid with a limited budget, it was kind of a hard buy for me at the time. But now that it's such an easy thing to do, an easy buy-in, we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But Kay, do you want to talk more about the history?
I'll do some touch points here. The history of Sega being online seems to start with the MegaNet, which was opened up in 1990 for the Mega Drive. So we're looking at a very long history early in bed between Sega and networking.
Wow.
Network gameplay. Pretty awesome. As you mentioned, Sega Channel was a cable channel service that piped games to a cart and allowed you to play them for a monthly fee. And there were plenty of games available on the Sega Channel for its time in history. Later on, a device came out, a modem device from XBand. It was not only available on the Genesis, but also on the Super Nintendo. And that modem was actually later built into Sega Channel adapters, so that one piece of hardware could get you both Sega Channel and online with XBand. What's really interesting about XBand and what relates to our podcast today is that the Japanese Sega Saturn modem is an XBand device. It was developed out of the North American XBand hardware and software protocols. And so it actually runs differently from our Netlink. The other really interesting thing about this, and Dave and I have had a little bit of conversation in prep for this podcast, they were the engineering behind being able to play online, multiplayer, 2-player games for any games that were compatible with XBand, was that the code was reverse engineered and then hacked to be able to allow you to do that. So take that for a moment and just imagine having to not have access to your source code for a game that was published and put out on the store shelves. They're piping it through the XBand service and intercepting the calls for the second player to allow a remote player.
That's crazy.
1995.
But anyways, do we want to move on to basically how the Saturn took advantage of the XBand modem?
I'm going to very lightly touch on the Japanese Saturn modem and the online capabilities. Right? They have the XBand modem. It was a 14.4 modem. It required credit, so you had to have a Saturn media card in order to play. And that kind of caused the service to not actually be all that popular. There was a lot of cost of entry in there. It also differed from our Netlink in the US because you had to dial to a centralized server. That server ended up becoming what we knew as SegaNet for the Dreamcast. Since that server no longer exists, every game that was only compatible with the XBand modem, so most of the Japanese games, are unplayable. You had to log into that server to be able to use it.
So then there's no way to play every single Sega Saturn game to its full capacity, even if you wanted to.
The US hardware, the Netlink, it has some of the XBand technology in it. It's a 28.8 modem, but instead of using a centralized server, it direct dials, something that you could do in the PC at the same area for early networking.
And the ironic part is that that downgrade actually managed to save it from unusability.
Exactly. And that's kind of the basis of the rest of our podcast. Before we go into some of that, there was a third and much lesser known networking option for the Saturn, and that's the DirectLink or Taisen cable. We're probably going to get into that a lot further in depth in a later podcast, but to touch base on it, if you've ever looked at the back of your Saturn and wondered what the heck that extra port was, it does have some capabilities outside of this, but for networking, it was a port that allowed you to hook up a serial cable between two Saturn locally. And some of the games in Japan, as well as at least two in the US and Europe, had some functionality with this cable. So it's kind of a neat little accessory to have.
I also did look on the back of my Saturn, that port is there. It's underneath the video.
Congratulations.
So, with all of that in mind, there was one thing that I really wanted to touch on specifically for this podcast, and that is the history of online multiplayer gaming. I own a disc that I picked up probably about a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer, called Dragon's Dream, and it is a demo for the Saturn. This is, by most accounts, the first consoleized MMO RPG, and for that reason alone, it's kind of incredible. This was meant to have as many as 100 players at once. So just go over some quick facts on it. Number one, even if you do get it, as of this moment, the servers are down, and it required the Japanese XBand Saturn modem. So without no central server and without the Dragon's Dream server, you can't play the game. So we'll get that out of the way first. Don't try hunting for this thing at this point in time.
Unless you want a nice, cool-looking coaster.
Right? A very expensive coaster, too. A game cost me over 100, and there have been reports that it goes for as many as 4. So.
Wow. All for a fancy coaster. Or just a login screen.
Yeah.
Right? It did require the keyboard and a Japanese modem to play. In order to play, you did have to dial into the local server, play for time. A PC version was planned, and apparently a client for the PC version was distributed in April of 1998, a Wikipedia article that was in Japanese. So I don't have any substantiating evidence behind whether or not it was, and I've got conflicting reports stating that the Windows version never actually made it out there. So if any of you guys out in our podcast land happens to have any information about Dragon's Dream for the PC, please let us know. Kind of cool. It was a 3D dungeon crawling RPG, and there were 2 worlds, a human world and a demon world, a couple of cities, 8 different races you could pick from, and it starts off very stereotypical RPG. You meet in a pub or a bar, and then you gather your party, and then you go hunt down some dungeons. So, kind of cool on that. It was a multiplayer role-playing game where all the players had to connect online, and there was only one server. So Saturn players would play with Windows players if the Windows version was actually released. Again, I don't have that info. Yeah, right. Cross-platform.
Cross-platform multiplat.
On the first essential, console MMO.
Talk about bold.
Right? It's it got beat out by a game for the 3DO, I believe, or made by the 3DO company by like 1 year as being the first modernized MMO RPG.
That's amazing.
The beta was started in the summer of 1997. Disc was released December 20th, 1997, and they charged you to play this. Monthly game fee for data storage was 500 yen. Gameplay started at 10 yen a minute, but eventually was dropped to 6 yen a minute.
Jeez, it's still pretty pricey.
Yeah, I mean, we do the conversion rates on that. I mean, the fact that you had to pay by minute, it's ouch, right?
Yeah, so you don't want to marathon that one.
It ended up being pretty obscure and not very popular. in addition to those fees, the player was also responsible for the server account fee to the server, because that server did. While there was one Dragon's Dream server, the centralized server that you had to dial into still had its own access fee as well. Plus, you had to pay the phone bill. So, cost of entry was a little steep for untested technology.
No kidding.
Welcome to 90s internet, my friend.
Right? Lessons learned from Dragon's Dream was supposedly later applied to Phantasy Star Online. So, this was the precursor to Sega being able to do Phantasy Star Online and fix the problems they ran into with Dragon's Dream.
Is there any footage or any gameplay available online of it working?
I have not seen much, but I also did not do too deep of research as far as video footage is concerned. If any exists, I mean, it's going to have been taken by like a VHS or a camcorder from the 90s. We're not going to have any modern gameplay.
Bummer. I would love to see it in action.
Yeah, I would too.
For sure.
The service closed on October 1st, 1990.
Dang, that still ran for a while though.
Yeah, not a bad run for a Saturn MMO. Regardless of what you think of them, the fact that this was an online RPG service that basically ran for about 2 years and potentially had cross-platform play. I mean, we want to talk about Sega being an innovator. You almost can't get too much more innovative than this. And I'm willing to bet that most of our audience and most of the Saturn community in general have never even heard that thing exist.
Awesome.
So the conclusion of, this section of the history is that Sega Net eventually folded, which is, we talked about with the Japanese games not being able to get online, and it became Sega Net for Dreamcast. And, the rest, as they say, is history.
Very sad one, but... Anyways, let's move on to some of the software available. I see there's a ton of games that were available, and I did not expect that many. I thought there was only like a handful, but there seems to be almost like 20 of them.
Yeah, for the Japanese Saturn modem, there's a bunch. And again, I mean, we're not going to get into any depth in any of these outside of Dragon's Dream and whatever worked with the Taisen cable, because these games don't work. If they were Netlink or XBand modem only, they will not boot or they will not, launch and play. So if you happen to be into imports and want to get these games, make sure that you do some research on them. Don't pick up the games that are that require the modem to function. You will be very sad and then have to go buy another copy of the game. Daytona USA Circuit Edition does work with the Taisen cable, so that's actually one that's worth picking up. Decathlete, Virtual On, and the Virtual On Media Pack, those ones will work locally, so you don't have to be forced to play only online. I have Pad Nifty and Habitat 2, but I've not actually busted them out of their cellophane yet, so I don't even know how functional they are.
I noticed Dragon's Dream is on that list of the Taisen. Yeah,
and that's something I'm hoping to find out more about. I have that. So we have this list, for our notes. And I think we'll just, rather than going through all this list of games, we'll just post this list to the notes and what have you. But there was evidence in the code for Dragon's Dream, apparently, that it works with the Taisen cable. I don't know how it would work with the Taisen cable.
So we could possibly get that working.
Yeah, there's some hacky kind of stuff. Was that Dave?
I said hypothetically.
Well, so one thing that happened tonight in my research that I didn't get to talk to you guys about before we did our interview was that someone had the enterprising idea of swapping files and rebuilding in ISO for a Japanese Saturn game, with modem capability. They pulled the Japanese modem files or modem related files out and swapped it with US Netlink files, and was able to get the games to connect to each other. But it stopped at the multiplayer lobby screen that you would normally see. So when you swapped out those files, it's no longer trying to contact that centralized server. It's actually doing a direct dial. But it can't get into the... You know how when we were doing our setup, choosing which player is which, it had to switch from your screen to initiate the Netlink call
Exactly.
to the next screen, which would show you that which layer is which and get ready to start, and it has a reset. Apparently, it just reset to a black screen and hung, but he was able to get communication going. So
That's a start.
yeah, it's more than I expected to see.
Well, we'll keep hacking at it, and eventually we'll be able to get that online. Well, not us personally, but the people working on it.
Yeah. And so, in a future cast, I think we'll talk about the Taisen cable and the Netlink relation to that. But for today, I kind of want to, really start talking about what gets us excited, and that is the fact that we can honestly unite Saturn fans, literally across the world by playing Netlink games online.
It'd be sweet, yeah. Something that really interests me is that I noticed that not only is Ogre Battle somewhat able to use the Taisen cable, the fact that Ogre Battle was released for the Saturn at all, I never even knew that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
US gets shafted again.
But so yeah, as Kay was talking, there are 5 games out there that you can pick up and play today online with somebody, a few houses over or across the country over your Netlink modem. And those games, Kay, let's see here. We got Sega Rally Netlink Edition. You've got the very expensive Daytona USA CCE Netlink Edition. Burn yourself a copy. Or
you got the Virtual On one as well.
You got Virtua On Netlink Edition. Now, not to be confused with the long box version, which doesn't support Netlink. You got to get yourself the small CD jewel case version that has that Netlink seal on the front.
Is that pretty pricey as well?
I don't think so. Like for 30, 40.
Oh, that's not awful.
Yeah, it's not too bad. And oftentimes you can still get the Netlink game pack, which is both the Sega Rally game and the Netlink version of Virtual On together. I ended up picking up like 2 or 3 of these in total. Like 2 were unopened and 1 was open because the first 2 I got were sealed. So
you're gonna have to send me one of those Virtual On copies.
And then you got Duke Nukem. The standard long box will do. That supports Netlink out of the box, and Saturn Bomberman, one of the best games on the Sega Saturn. Also supports Netlink right out of the box.
Yeah, I guess first thing that you have to kind of let the elephant in the room. I mean, the 2 of right now the most expensive Saturn games, common U.S. Saturn games. 2 of the most expensive Saturn games are in here right now for the U.S. district, and that's Saturn Bomberman and Daytona Netlink. So you almost have to ask yourself, is it worth it for those to purchase?
Okay, you actually don't have to.
Yeah, I say you don't have to, and if you have yourself a Phantom mod chip, you are good to go. Just burn yourself a copy, and you can have the Netlink inserted. You're right up and running. Exactly.
And in our previous cast, we touched a little bit on mod chips. We also touched on pseudo Saturn. So I work with every once in a while with Cafe Alpha, who is the current holder of pseudo Saturn's code, and pushed out the version of pseudo Saturn called pseudo Saturn Kai. And I talked a little bit at length with him about the ability to swap cartridges. I have success with swapping a pseudo Saturn cart for a Netlink modem. I cannot recommend doing this if you're not, fairly experienced in what to expect. And, honestly, I don't think I can recommend this at all. I mean, I've been doing this for a while. I have a lot of Saturn, so I can sack 1 or 2, in testing things like this out. But Cafe Alpha also expressed his concern that this can harm the port. So,
but to be fair, even inserting and de-inserting the cart would damage the port. Oh, breathing on the port would damage it.
It is one of the most notorious ports out there, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, you can take it how you want it, but I mean, either way, if you want to swap it, you're going to damage it. If you don't, you're if you just swap it regularly, you're gonna damage it without anything in it.
He had concern about the fact that pseudo Saturn Kai does load some data after the fact, so the timing is going to be a little on the strange side. And he also had some concern about, I believe, voltage possibilities running while swapping. So while we can't recommend this, I mean, I don't know if you guys feel like you could recommend it, but I know I can't.
I wouldn't even recommend removing it with the system off.
Yeah, I don't like cartridge swapping at all. I think that edge connector not the edge connector, but the pins on that Saturn. I've already had to do some repairs on mine just to get some good solid contact with the OEM cart. Just having it plugged in and being able to read.
Yeah, my cart's like on the edge of breaking, so I basically I'm gonna keep it in there and I'm not gonna ever remove it.
So, there you have it. I guess our official word is, we don't recommend swapping, but
stick with a mod chip or a RIA.
Yeah. But the information is out there, and we'd be doing you guys all a disservice if we told you that it wasn't possible. So it is possible. We don't recommend it, but if you want to take that upon yourselves for the risk, have at you, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 25 Saturns lying around, what's one with a not working cartridge slot, right?
Right.
I mean, if you're willing to invest in the exploit that we're going to talk about involved in getting this working, you're probably already the kind of person that might either be interested in getting a mod chip, or maybe in the process of doing that, and that can be done for a fairly low buy-in as well, and the Phantom mod chips is fairly easy to install as well. So I highly recommend that if you're considering this and you don't want to plunk down, the $2,000 to $3,000 required for CCE Netlink, or the $200 to $300 required for Saturn Bomberman.
So, let's talk a little bit about being able to get the Netlink online.
Yeah, well, before I bring our guests on, and that is Sega RPG fan, and it's still thinking 1999 from the Dreamcast Talk forums. This is something that I was looking into a few months back. Just, I think Patrick might have mentioned something about Dream Pi for Saturn, or somebody mentioned it to me, and that got me thinking. And then I'm doing a Google search and ending up at the Dreamcast Talk forums, and it turns out there has been some cases of using the Dream Pi with the Saturn, and it is used in the context of getting the internet browsing, the Planet Web disks going, but as far as matchups and direct dial from one person to another, they've kind of had to go a different route. And that's why we're going to have these guests on to talk about what that requires. And basically, we're talking about using VoIP, which is a teleconferencing. Basically, it's a
voice over IP.
Voice over IP, exactly. And it's basically emulating an analog phone line through audio codecs, and it's encoding and decoding audio, and then sending that audio and then demodulating it on the other side into data. It's something that a lot of people who have experience with telephone services and they have experience with networking would just be very skeptical that it would even work, because there's so much latency involved. It just seems like the Netlink modem would not know how to handle that. But there's a couple of guys who, through trial and error, were able to figure it out. And we decided to contact them, hit them up, and get them on the show to talk about the exploit that they came up with, which is Saturn Netlink over VoIP.
Now, before we do bring those guys on, and we want to make sure that you guys know, you do have to purchase a specific VoIP adapter to be able to get this to work. The model will be linked, and unless we have the model offhand.
I just know that it's an unlocked Linksys. I don't know the model number by heart, but we are going to put it in the show notes here. We're going to link you to its Thinking's guide so that you guys can get all that information. It's about a $10 to $13 piece of equipment, and it's a lot of fun. It's pretty easy getting the setup going with the guide that he has laid out for us.
Yeah. So one kind of technical aspect, and I have a small bit of a background in the reasoning for the need for analog telephone for this. VoIP is designed to reproduce the range of your human voice, right, from one side of the internet to the other. Literally converts your voice and the frequencies of the human voice, which are far more limited than the frequencies that can be found in fax data modems. So because the amount of data that could be pushed through an analog phone line didn't involve compression or cutting off those frequencies, using a plain old telephone system analog phone line is really like the way to go when you're dealing with data for credit card machines, fax machines, and things like our Netlink. And I'm not just talking about having a landline. If you have a digital service, they optimized your digital service and that network to cut off the frequencies that are above and below the normal ranges of a human voice, because that's what the service is there to provide. But again, the tones that are generated by these electronic devices are beyond that range, and sometimes that data gets lost. Not to mention the difference between how this data gets transferred.
And that was something that was talked about a lot. So these guys were able to use a fax machine codecs with this device to enable this to work. Because this is an unlocked device, and they were able to make modifications to it. And so that's what's so exciting.
Now, Dave and I got together one night about a month or two ago. And because we both had the same, we saw the same information separately before we even started this podcast, I'm assuming. And we both got adapters. So kind of like a midnight on a Tuesday or something, we spent about half an hour to an hour getting it set up. It is a very detailed article, a very detailed setup process, and you have to be meticulous about following it. But we were successful and had a round of Saturn Bomberman.
How was the latency on that, by the way?
Truthfully, it was pretty laggy. I mean, input probably like 600 milliseconds, between 400 and 600 milliseconds. I'm aware that it is the worst performing game of all of them. The driving games and Virtual On performing a lot better. They say that Sega Rally and Daytona USA handle almost unrecognizable from the original. From just doing dial-up ISP or from doing like telephone line simulator. Mm-hmm. But that Saturn Bomberman, for some reason, I don't know why, but it's just one of the games that I guess handles a little poorly. But that's why I wanted to try it, because I just wanted to, see if we could get that running, then pretty much any other game we're gonna have a better experience with, And
I mean, it was so laggy though.
Yeah, it was playable. I mean, we had a match and it was close, but Kay still beat me.
There's a joke behind this. I once told Dave that I was amazing at Saturn Bomberman, but he missed the second part, which is I'm amazingly bad at this game.
So that says something right there. But if you guys are thinking that you're going to get online with Saturn Bomberman and have it be, perfect, we don't want to get your hopes up there. I think that you can get online, and if there are some settings that you guys can try to minimize latency, and you might have a better experience than we did at 12 o'clock at night.
You guys could probably mail bombs back and forth to each other in real life and still have better latency.
Yeah. But that being said, there are still 4 other games that are actually pretty responsive, and that people say are quite playable, and we're going to talk to these guys about that.
I don't want to discourage anyone from from trying it, period. There is hope that with the right settings and other tweaks that may come later down the road, that we might be able to get this to be a lot more playable. Quite frankly, I actually enjoyed it. I was probably feeling more about the tickle factor that for the second
we got it working.
I got something, working, and for the first time for doing, a Netlink online. I thought that was pretty amazing. The other thing that I got running, which we very, very bare bones touched on, was a telephone line simulator. So that doesn't go online, obviously, but it's worth mentioning that if you get it, even a cheap TLS, telephone line simulator, you can still play these head-to-head locally. So, that if you're looking for a head-to-head experience with Saturn Bomberman, and you don't have, or don't want to have that laggy experience of the VoIP, you can utilize it using a telephone line simulator, and it works fantastically. And there's nothing to stop anybody from actually dialing up their buddy and attempting to do a Netlink direct dial without using, a VoIP system.
If you have an analog provider, a lot of phone services nowadays are digital, so you might have a problem if that's the case. If you have like AT&T and you paid for an extra phone line, $19 a month or something, and chances are it's a VoIP line. It's basically VoIP service, and you don't know it is, but it is. So you're going to have trouble doing it that way. But if you can find an old dial-up that's analog, that would work.
So could you actually plug the wire directly into each other's Saturn adapter, and would that work?
No, because there's no telephone line, which is why the phone line simulator comes into play for that.
I gotcha.
That's what you'd have to simulate, that line voltage and like the pickups and the...
Yep. Now, when I worked at a major office printer manufacturer as support, one of the support calls that we got a lot was with fax. And through working for that company, I found out that many phone companies and telephone service providers that are not cable-based, so Comcast, Cox, was it Time Warner? Turner? I can't remember.
Right, Time Warner.
Those guys will be pretty much automatically out, but your traditional POTS, plain old telephone system, may still have options for you to get an analog line specifically for use with fax.
Also like DSL companies, right?
Anybody who did phone service. So on our side, we have like Quest or CenturyLink now should be able to do it. It's normally a pretty pricey. Like I've actually, so how much of a Saturn nerd am I? I was willing to pay $45 a month at one point. I was really seriously considering putting in an analog phone line and having it dial out from Portland to Scappoose so that my buddy Dave Hickman and I could actually do Netlink.
Wow.
Yeah. I was talked out of it, and I'm glad that I was talked out of it in the long run, especially now that we have this kind of a option. But the end point on this is that, this is a modernized solution, and it's not going to be perfect because the technology we're working with is 20 plus years old and wasn't designed for this. But for what it is, I had fun, and I'd be willing to play Saturn Bomberman laggy as all hell, especially if it's the only way I can win.
Exactly.
At least you're going to have an excuse if you lose.
Hey, we're going to have a rematch.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it, my friend. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think we've kind of touched along all the basics, and we can get more into it after our interview, but maybe we should introduce our guest.
Absolutely. So I reached out to a couple of the guys on the Dreamcast Talk forums. These guys are very active in the scene with getting the Dreamcast online and also the Saturn, recent developments with the Saturn. You have Sega RPG Fan, who I know has been an integral part in getting Saturn over VoIP working. His name is Joe, or Sega RPG Fan. Joe, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well.
Awesome. And you're coming to us from East Coast?
Minnesota, actually.
Oh, nice. My mom is from Minnesota. It's
Mine
cold
too.
there. Very cold. And then we also have Rio, or It's Still Thinking 1999. He has done a lot of work on promoting the trick or exploit, as it were, on YouTube, on his channel, and then also creating like an official guide to make it easy for everybody to get this setup going on theirs. His mic isn't working right now, but he is in the chat, and he may be able to add to the interview periodically in comments. But I wanted to get started with you, Joe, and I just wanted to ask, because Zaiden couldn't be here, and I know that you worked with him as well. How did you guys basically get interested, get started in getting this exploit going, considering if I'm going back to the forums and reading a lot of these old posts, there was a lot of skepticism, or just, there's people trying to get it working over VoIP, but it was pretty obvious that the Netlink modem didn't really like the latency and would constantly drop the connection because it wasn't a synchronous connection. So what caused you guys to persevere with that and make it work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the way you described it is pretty accurate. Yeah, a few people had tried it with VoIP over the years, and they were usually using some kind of service like Vonage or whatever, and yeah, just the reliability wasn't there. The call would drop, et cetera, et cetera.
So they were using a VoIP provider, correct?
Right. As far as I know, I think that's all anyone had ever tried. And I was doing some digging on these things, and if you have an unlocked device, there's ways to get them to connect directly to each other without going through a provider. And just looking at the different settings on there and figuring, I was thinking, if we can get these to connect directly to each other, we might eliminate some of these issues with the latency and all this. So I would say maybe 6 years ago or so or whatever, I went on the Saturn League forums, and I kind of posted this stuff, and again, I was met with skepticism. And at the time, getting someone to buy one of these adapters, they were a little more expensive back then, maybe like $40-50. Sure. So it was hard to convince someone to say, hey, you want to try this out with me? Drop $40-50 for something that might not even work. Right. Yeah, so that kind of hit a dead end. And I can't remember when Zaiden and I started this. Maybe it was about a year ago now. I was kind of getting back into the Dreamcast online scene and kind of checking out the forums on Dreamcast Talk, and I saw his post on there. He wanted to try to get the Netlink going over DreamPie. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Yeah, that's sure. The project to get the Sega Dreamcast online through the same means, right?
Use like a Raspberry Pi that'll act as basically your own little dial-up ISP.
Yeah, that's how I found you guys, actually, because back in like 2008, I was on the Dreamcast Talk forums a lot, and I was doing the whole PC to DC server thing, or it was kind of where you just had a PC MCIA modem in the back of your PC, and you just share your Ethernet connection. You had to do a bunch of registry edits and stuff like that. And then DreamPie came out as kind of like an all-in-one solution kind of thing. I was looking for a SAT, and so I just did like a Google search, and then I found you guys. And that's how this all started. I kind of went down that rabbit hole. So yeah, take us further. What did that involve? Like, where is Zaiden located, by the way?
He's in Texas.
Okay, so he's in Texas and you're in Minnesota. What was the process for you guys R&Ding that and going back and forth and doing all this testing?
A lot of text messages.
Okay.
Yeah, so I saw Zaiden's post on Dreamcast Talk, and I got in touch with him and said, this is something that I had been kicking around for a while. I think we can make this work. And these adapters had come down in price to like $10 on eBay. Like, I'll drop $10 to see if this will work. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we connected up and we started hashing out the details, trying all kinds of different settings, trying to get our latency down and our reliability up. And yeah, I mean, what that guide has now is sort of what we've been able to figure out to date to get the best quality connection.
Okay. Is that like a theoretical max, or are you guys thinking that it might be possible to get even better performance out of, like, say, Bomberman, which I know is the game that suffers the most?
Mm-hmm. It might be possible. I don't know with the hardware that that we're using, if someone was able to write like a custom program on the DreamPi that could, you know, kind of bypass VoIP in a way, because there's a lot of overhead and extra stuff in that's not really needed.
Exactly. So would it be so would we be talking about like hacking the firmware of the VoIP adapter, or could it be possible that we might find a different adapter entirely that might have better compatibility?
It would be more someone having to write a program for the DreamPi.
So is it actually possible to pass it more than like 56K through it, or whatever the limit of the adapter is?
Which adapter are you talking about?
Just say to get the Saturn Online, if they came up with some adapter, would there be a way to... Is there a limit that the Saturn hardware can then handle in terms of data rates?
The Netlink modem is 28.8.
But it's the overhead that really is the problem, because if I understand this correctly, the Netlink modem was designed to use a synchronous connection, which means it's waiting for a response constantly. Whereas like a simple telephone connection is pretty much like one way. There's tolerances for latency, like huge tolerances for latency, but Netlink will just disconnect if there's too much latency. And so that's really been the biggest issue to tackle with Netlink over VoIP, is just getting the latency down, correct?
Yep. I think I was reading that the whole Netlink system was designed with, you know, sort of a max 150 milliseconds of latency in mind, which I think the best we're able to do is 300 at a minimum. At the best,
so, and like 600 at the most, right?
Yeah, so it's amazing that it's even working, in my opinion.
That's what I was thinking, because there's basically like a 200 to 300 milliseconds delay on a regular analog connection, and then VoIP to VoIP, you can add like the 200 to 300 milliseconds on both sides, right? So it could be like between 400 to 600 milliseconds.
Yep.
And then there's the whole codec thing, right? It encodes and then decodes the audio, and then does it on the other side as well before sending it to... So it's a lot of redundancy, in other words.
Yeah, and the encoding decoding is pretty fast, because we're using essentially an uncompressed codec is how we have them set up. But there's you know, send and receive buffers on these things, because, you know, stuff doesn't travel at a given rate on the internet. You have to buffer a few packets here and there.
You mentioned writing new software for the DreamPi to adapt for Netlink use. What theoretically do you feel would be needed, and kind of like a pseudocode?
Well, what you'd want to do is, instead of sending, you know, voice sound information over the internet, you want to send the actual data that the modem is sending. So you'd want to demodulate that on your local DreamPi, then just send the data to the other DreamPi or the person you're connecting to, and then that would modulate it and send it to their Netlink. I don't know if that would help with latency, but it would definitely reduce the data that you're sending over the internet.
So would we be cutting out the VoIP adapter altogether out of the mix?
In that scenario, yeah.
Okay. So right now, the DreamPi fits in all this in so much as you guys have internet browsing working with it, but you don't have multiplayer direct dial matching going, right?
Right. Yeah, the DreamPi is only internet connectivity.
And again, internet connectivity doesn't require that synchronous connection.
Right, so
it's more passive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then I guess this might be kind of like the tip of the iceberg, or maybe like a stopgap for the future of getting DreamPi to do all of this. And I wonder, so at this point it's kind of hypothetical, but at least we have an idea of what might need to be done in order to achieve better performance on that, or at least achieve that hypothetical, you know, 28K speed that the Netlink was originally capable of.
Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
so is anybody working on that right now, or is that kind of just been tossed around?
I don't think anyone's working on it right now. That's way above my pay grade.
Okay, all right, cool. But that's good. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Have you guys looked into any other pieces of hardware in replacement of the current VoIP adapter?
Just a little bit. I mean, are you thinking like another type of VoIP adapter or something completely different?
I mean, could we do something like modify the DreamPi to work with the Saturn compared to A Dreamcast?
Yeah, I mean, in order to get the Netlink multiplayer games working, you would need some kind of separate program, different from what the Dreamcast has. If all you want to do is surf the internet on the Sega Saturn, the Dream Pi works perfectly as is.
There have been a few people ask here and there, if their VoIP adapters would work. I'm guessing that, they would have to do a bunch of testing on their end, and it's a whole different, firmware. So that's probably not going to happen. The one that we have right now is the one you guys did all the work on. So that's the one that if people are interested in getting their Netlink online today and playing direct dial with somebody else, that's the one that they should invest in.
Correct. Yeah, because that's the one we're familiar with, and we've got step-by-step instructions for that. If you're going to choose a different adapter, there's a good chance you'll be able to get it to work, but you'll have to do a lot of that work yourself, figuring out the settings.
Exactly, which took you guys quite a while. So this is the easier route. And at a $10 to $13 buy-in on Amazon or eBay, it's a low cost of entry, And if you already have Netlink, Kay and I, we took it for a test drive at like midnight. And we were using Bomberman, so and he still kicked my ass. but
how did that work? How did that play for you guys?
It was really laggy, but then again, I was expecting that because I've seen Rio's, or it's still thinking I've seen his videos of it, and so I kind of knew to expect that game to perform poorly. But I kind of wanted to test like the worst game and see how that did, and if I consider that to be playable or at least proof of concept. I've heard that the driving games do actually handle pretty good. And then I wanted you to speak to something. I've also heard that using the 3D control pad or the analog control produces better results or lower latency. Is that true?
I haven't noticed, but that's generally what I use for the racing. I wouldn't have.
Okay.
I don't have anything to compare it to. I wouldn't have pulled out the digital pad for Sega Rally, for instance. It's like impossible to play that game with that.
Oh, I disagree.
Well, maybe you're way better than me.
No, but I mean, you know what? It's a good point though, because I think Sega Rally Netlink, wasn't that tuned for the 3D control pad? And I don't have a whole lot of experience there. Like classic Sega Rally, I've got that game mastered on the classic, Japanese D-pad. And I mean, it's sublime, but I'm not saying that it isn't with the 3D control pad either. I just, reading some of the posts on the forums, I've noticed that people seem to agree that they seem to, and it's still thinking right now, he's saying that it's...
They said it's better to autocorrect with the 3D pad in those games.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, so right now, you guys on the Dreamcast Talk forum, you guys are running kind of an ongoing thread for matchup, correct?
Yeah.
And so people, if you're interested in finding other people out there that are available for matchups that have this set up, you can join the Dreamcast Talk forums and you can check out that thread, and people throw up their time and availability for matchups. And we're kind of doing the same thing as well on the Sega Saturn Collectors of America group on Facebook. We're trying to integrate some kind of matchup so that, people who are interested can get into that.
Are you guys also, because I noticed Rio's post today on the Netlink League. Oh, it's, you're responding to that. It says Saturn League is pretty dead. So we have more of a chance getting a matchup on DC Talk as opposed to the Saturn Netlink League.
That's sad.
Well, that's what we're doing here. We're trying to get it on this podcast because I kind of felt the same way. I felt like you guys put a lot of work into this. And I looked at it and saw, well, this isn't just something that should be reduced to a simple thread on a forum. We should get this information out there and let people understand that, it seems like Saturn fans are so dedicated in collecting hardware and making sure that they're tapping into every bit of potential that their console offers. So
yeah, for sure.
This is kind of huge, and this speaks to what we're going to talk about in the rest of the podcast, is how Sega was always really ahead of their time, and they were always really pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And the fact that you've got a over 20-year console here that can still get online and still play with somebody, across the country is kind of a big deal. And that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to, lengthen the life of these things and make sure that we're still using the real hardware. I'm sure it won't be too long, or maybe it's even currently possible to play online multiplayer against somebody through an emulator. But, there's something to be said for using the original hardware, and, at least you're putting it to good use. Kay, were you going to say something else about the setup?
I'm curious if you guys have considered or run into any security issues regarding setting this up. The fact that you have to give up your public IP, which, for some people that might be a scary thing, not well versed in, how the internet works. And was wondering if you guys had run into any security issues yourselves or saw any setbacks that might not be related directly to the VoIP adapter or the Saturn Netlink itself.
Depending on how you go about opening your home network, it could open you up to some security risks. I'm not an expert in networks, so I can't really say what all those would be. But yeah, you do have to share your IP address for someone to connect to you, which is why it's not a good idea to post that on the forum or the thread. So we usually communicate through text messages is usually the main way we go about it, and just trust that your fellow Saturn nuts aren't going to hack into your network, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
We're all a pretty tight-knit community, and we're pretty much anybody that's willing to do all that crap to get the Saturn online. Pretty sure they wouldn't be just doing it so they can hack your IP.
I would hope so.
And I think that's important. That's one of the reasons why I was kind of interested in starting a matchup thread on a reputable Facebook group where there are admins and we can report, people who do malicious things, so just in the same manner as, if you got cheated out of something on a trade or a sale, this person had a reputation, and, you can rep for them. So I felt like it's really important when it comes to security to know who you're dealing with and be sure that, they come recommended from other people, that they have a reputation in the community. And that is one way that you can protect yourself. And also, Kay mentioned, I noticed you guys have DMZ as an easy option, and then you also mentioned port forwarding. And he was just pretty much, hands down port forward. It is, it's an extra step, but it's definitely going to provide you a little bit more security than just using DMZ. Do you agree?
Yes, I'm kind of an advocate for port forwarding. I know the DMZ kind of came out from the DreamPie, where people would DMZ their DreamPie, and in that instance, it's not really much of a security risk because it's all getting routed to the Dreamcast. So if the Dreamcast doesn't know what to do with the packet, it's just going to drop it. You can't really hack a Dreamcast.
Right. Well, it'd be cool if you could.
Whereas with the VoIP adapter, I guess you conceivably could. So yeah, port forwarding would be the better way to go about it.
Yeah. And Kay, do you want to say anything about that? I know we were talking the other night, and that was one of the things you were kind of adamant about.
Well, there's also some devices out there for routing that don't have a DMZ. That's a fairly consumer level thing that I've noticed. I don't see it in very many commercial or professional networking devices. So I didn't have a choice when we were doing our setup at midnight on a Tuesday. I didn't have a choice to use that to make it easy, and I felt that as an overall practice, because there's many reasons to learn how to do port forwarding, that it would be just an overall better solution. DMZ would probably be easier to get up and running right away, but I think the benefits of port forwarding are far beyond the application that we're utilizing it here.
And that's kind of what I agreed with Kay, is that if any of you guys out there you're with a friend, you're trying to just get this up and running, take it for a test drive, proof of concept, so that you can get your system running, feel free to DMZ between the two of you. But if you're going to be using this as an ongoing, you've got that VoIP adapter connected to your setup and it's ready to go, then you don't want to just leave it DMZ'd like that. Just common practice is probably better to set yourself up with port forwarding just for an extra bit of security. But if you are just like Kay said, just trying to get it set up and running your first time, and you just want to make sure that it works, the DMZ might be an easy way to do that. I thought it was worth mentioning, because security is it's a concern, nowadays, but it shouldn't be something that stops you guys from being interested in this, in giving this a shot. Just remember, to rely on the community that you are, part of to find matchups.
So Rio mentioned in the chat that he is involved in networking, and he agrees that port forwarding is your better option. He also mentions on a side note that the Yabuse emulator has Netlink support, but as far as he knows, no one has actually gotten games to work on that. It was mostly used for doing development for custom browsers.
Oh, okay.
And he also says that he recommends getting a keyboard for your Saturn, so typing is a lot easier between people.
And the keyboard looks pretty awesome to begin with.
Yeah, that was a really
It
sweet
does.
thing. I'm sorry mine broke.
I wonder if you
Now,
can
there's
actually hook that to your actual PC, because does it use any special adapters at all, or?
There is a PS2 adapter, so you can use any keyboard.
Oh, that's cool.
It came with the Netlink pack, and you can buy it by itself, or you can, for a little bit more, get the Sega keyboard.
I want to get that for work.
It's pretty odd. That's pretty rad.
Do any of you have the Sega keyboard?
I saw one at a game store. I never picked it up though.
Hey, do you have it?
I had it for many years, and I think it was the escape key broke. And so I think I finally got rid of it. I don't think I still have it in any of my stuff.
Yeah, there's one on eBay either now, or I don't know if it's still there, but I saw it and I was like, I wanted it so bad, and it was cheap too, but one of the keys was broken.
I think I saw some pictures of it, and I think it just has... I think it's just a normal keyboard with the keyboard adapter for the Saturn, so I don't think it's anything special.
It has a Sega logo on it though. It's
Yeah.
like a badged official product, so it has a product number. If you are crazy about collecting hardware, then you've probably got to have it. Otherwise, it's just a standard PS2 keyboard.
I'd like to use it in my work, but I have a really nice mechanical keyboard. But I mean, it is Sega Saturn after all, so maybe I can deal with the squishy keys.
Yeah, it does have a Windows key. Rio was mentioning. It was not the most comfortable keyboard to utilize. It was very, there's no ergonomics to it. But it was my only keyboard when I first moved to Portland. So I missed that thing, but I would probably never use it today. Like,
Perfect analogy for moving to Portland. You're such a hipster that used a Saturn keyboard.
So Joe, I know we don't.
They didn't
have
sell keyboards in Portland.
I moved from Hawaii, and we were pretty much like, used all of our fun to get up here. I wasn't going to go buy a keyboard anytime soon.
I gotcha.
Joe, I was just wondering if you had any experience with, using like a telephone line simulator to do like LAN stuff.
Yeah, I've done that. That was one of
Like
the
a precursor to all this stuff, right?
Yeah, I did that a few times. I had some people over to play some head-to-head matches, like in my basement, with the line simulator between two Saturns, and that works really well. It's better than a phone connection almost at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Kay did that at one of his conventions too.
I actually have another question that I am just now remembering. In the early days of getting the Dreamcast online, there was the Netopia router.
Right.
Do you see any means or reasons for being able to use that particular piece of hardware with the Saturn?
Only if you wanted to get online. I mean, that's pretty much been replaced by the DreamPi at this point. It does the exact same thing.
There was something about the Netopia router that made it special. Is that it had the built-in RJ11. It had like the phone jack, and it had the Ethernet.
Yeah, it was kind of an odd piece of hardware that was more or less made it really easy it was a lot easier than that whole PC DC server thing you were talking about earlier.
Right.
Whereas it was just a self-contained piece of hardware.
Cool.
Rio mentioned in the chat. Also, someone in one of my Saturn videos made this amazing comment, quotes, "Got it on launch day and it came with Daytona. The first system I played, Tomb Raider. Then I bought a PlayStation and had the best of both worlds. Shame the Saturn didn't get the same support as in Japan. The Saturn was the first thing that got me on the internet too. Spent many hours in chat rooms on the Saturn. Crazy fact, I met my wife online with the Saturn. Been together since 1997. End
That's
quote.
awesome.
Wow.
That
Wow,
is
the
awesome.
Netopia is a couple of $100 now. I've got 2 of them.
You know, it's funny. I was in that Sega archiving project that I was doing with the website, going back to that 96 archive. They shut down the chat because there was some, typical internet stuff going on, a lot of indecent stuff. But it's just funny to go back and read some of those threads that are still online that were posted by people using their Netlinks. So, but that is funny, man. So I was just wondering, one more question, guys, is you mentioned in the guide, Rio, you mentioned in your guide that QoS settings might help make a difference, and I did a little bit of messing around with it on my end, but I couldn't really tell if it was making any difference. And you're typing. For QoS, it does make a difference, but it all depends if your provider allows you to have QoS. Okay, so that answers a whole other question. The other night, guys, last time we recorded, remember I took the internet down completely before we did that podcast because I tried to set up QoS settings on the UDP port for Discord, and it took down my internet completely. So maybe Cox didn't like me trying to set up QoS on my router. And so I don't really know a whole lot about QoS, so I didn't know it was like a service that might be specific to your ISP. So I guess if any of you guys listening out there have QoS, or you know that your ISP supports it, then I guess it sounds like it could help. And Rio writes, for example, here in Canada, TELUS does not give us QoS for homes. Business is a whole different beast.
So let me ask you this, Rio. On consumer-based routers that have QoS settings available, normally like a check mark for the lowest level, but sometimes customizable, would you recommend making changes to the settings within the router to enable QoS, and then fine-tune those settings if you're not sure about your ISP's willingness to let you have QoS over your whole internet in pipe?
That's a good question. I think that's why it took my internet down, is because my ISP doesn't provide it.
So QoS, it's like ISP specific. You can't
Well, it's quality of service. So I have a Netgear router. It has QoS settings in there that you can get it all set up and everything, and it basically partitions priority. It's like giving process priority, like
I gotcha.
in Windows Explorer. So you're giving a higher priority to Netflix or to your Roku or for example, to this specific UDP voice port, so that my voice wouldn't drop out, because you guys were telling me that my voice was dropping out. But then when I did it, it took my entire internet down, and my modem hated me for 15 minutes and wouldn't restart. So I think Cox maybe was slapping me on the hand.
Dang, Cox is one mean mofo.
On the old WRT 54Gs, you could run Tomato firmware. You could run one of those DDWRT firmwares, and it actually allowed you some very robust QoS settings. And that was my first experience with QoS. Was it actually allowed me to, instead of prioritizing certain types of traffic, which would be when the packet is encapsulated, that packet would be tagged with what kind of traffic it was. And Rio, I'm sure, will correct me if I'm making any mistakes in my network terminology for that. On that particular firmware router, you could prioritize all traffic from one specific port. So your standard, router, the the WRT54 had 4 network ports on the back of it, and you could say, okay, all traffic from port 1 is prioritized over any of the others. It doesn't matter what kind of traffic it was. So I haven't seen that kind of QoS on anything but hack routers, because I don't really use much besides that. And my current router does not have that kind of fine-tuned capabilities. You have to actually go in and choose what kind of traffic and set certain rules.
Broke the rules.
Okay, Rio says, he would do it anyway. For example, his provider, if they don't give us QoS, if you try to request it, in theory, the provider would say, you're home, so we won't give it to you. And they would just not do QoS. It should not affect your internet, but it all depends on what provider you have.
So it could potentially help, and it's in the guide, and it's an optional step, but you guys can play around with that and see if it improves your experience at all. And, you know, theoretically, if you take a game like Bomberman, which does perform a little bit worse than the other ones, you know, you might notice an improvement.
So to close this all out, I want to thank you guys for making it tonight. And
yes, thank you so much.
do you guys have anything, parting words or words of wisdom that you want to send off to our 3 listeners?
Or to plug. I mean, yeah, plug away, please.
Yeah, please. You get anything you want to get out there. Any shouts?
Oh man, I hadn't thought about that.
Well, we should mention Zaiden, who was I mentioned it before, but Zaiden was a integral role in this, along with you, Joe.
Yes, definitely.
So
Definitely want to give Zaiden a shout out. Yeah, without him and our like I said, many text messages back and forth, we never would have got this working. So definitely shout out.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, what you've done for the scene, because I definitely think this is an awesome thing, and I personally am really excited about it and pushing it a lot personally on the Facebook groups. And I think if anybody out there is listening and you guys have coding skill, you guys are programmers and you know Linux, and you feel like getting involved in this, hit one of us up. We'll plug you in with the right person. But if you think that it's possible, you might be interested in contributing a program for the Dream Pi or working on a project like that. It sounds like that might be the future of getting the Saturn online with better performance. And as we all know, time plays its role and things get better, so. But right now, we do have a solution that works thanks to these guys.
Yes, so thank you very much, guys. I don't think we can thank you guys enough for what you're doing for the community.
One last note for Rio was that Zaiden also brought back the Netlink zone. He got that online.
That's right. He did through the Dream Pipe, right?
Yeah, that's actually really cool. If you connect with your Saturn through the Dream Pi, it'll automatically redirect to the proper Netlink zone web pages. Zaiden, he kind of scoured and found the original graphics for that and remade those pages. So that's really cool. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't.
Did you have to buy the domain for that back? Because I know they did the same thing with the Sonic website.
No, it just works through a DNS redirect on the Dream Pi, so it sends it to the Dream Pipe website is where it's hosted.
Interesting.
Cool.
That's
so
some cool
technically,
stuff.
then you're able to add more content to that.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, if anybody wants to take their Saturn online, and
that's awesome. That'd actually be really cool, like a coffee table thing. Turn your Saturn on and look at the daily news, maybe see what's going on in the community,
and then download those save games you haven't been able to download.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If we can get some like Dreamcast style stuff.
Dude, that'd be sweet. I'd go and get that just for the news. Wake up at 5 in the morning, turn my Saturn on, see what's been going on in the world of the world.
Check your stocks.
Yeah.
Seems like
check my horse bets.
Zaiden is apparently making a new Saturn website with new news sections, etc. According to Rio, this is amazing to me. Like that, as awesome as gaming online, on the Saturn is. Hearing that you can plug in a piece of tech from 20 some odd years ago and actually still have it modern uses, right? Like the Netlink zone being resurrected from the dead. That's incredible. So bravo to you guys, and thank you very much. Thank you for being here and taking the time out of your bedtime to chat with us tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate it, and we can't thank you guys enough for all you're doing, because this is like the coolest thing I've seen in a long time.
And we're going to be sure to direct our listeners over to that Dreamcast Talk forum thread where they can see Ryo's original official guide. I believe it's at version 1.8, but I'm sure that he'll update it if it receives any new information. And then also there is a matchup thread there. That's an ongoing matchup thread. And we are going to link that in the show notes as well. So if you guys have any questions, these two guys or these three guys here, It's Still Thinking 1999 and Zaiden and Sega RPG Fan would be the guys to ask if you have any technical questions, because they are the ones who discovered this and created this exploit. So feel free to hit them up.
One last question for both of you guys before you head out. Favorite Saturn game?
Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Not bad, not bad.
Wow, double Panzer Dragoons.
Yeah.
Wow, awesome.
All right, guys.
Saga's an awesome game. That's one of my prized possessions.
It sure is.
I think Still Thinking is the first one though. It's just this Panzer Dragoon, so. But still.
Oh, that's the one he's going for, just because. Yeah, well, it's classic.
Yeah, you can't beat any of them. The whole series is fantastic. So.
Good
All right,
choice.
gentlemen. Thank you guys
Yep.
so much for joining us tonight.
Yep, and have a great night.
All right, have a good night.
All right, see you guys.
All right, so that was our interview with Joe and It's Still Thinking 1999 from the Dreamcast Talk forums regarding the use of Saturn Netlink hardware online using a VoIP adapter. And yeah, this is the future. So,
The future's in the past,
right.
like they always say.
Or the past is in the future.
Shut up,
This
David.
all kind of came about because of a event that's in the Sega Saturn Collectors of America group that Dave here is kind of posted up, and we want to see if you guys have interest in meeting up other Saturn enthusiasts and playing online, meeting each other, really building out a sub community for this kind of online play. But maybe you're not really that technical, you don't want to deal with that. I have a couple of these adapters and have them set up. So depending on the interest in that, I might be willing to go ahead and sell one pre-set up for you at cost. You just want to really build up this community. So let us know your interest levels. Respond to the event that's been set up in Sega Saturn Collectors of America. And let's see where we can go with this. Find the king of Netlink.
It's a lot more intense than the King of Fighters.
I don't know, man. Nothing beats ducking.
Anyways, is there anything you guys want to plug before we head out?
Got nothing here.
No.
Alright, I just want to plug all my homeboys in the fighting game community in Arizona. Had a blast playing some King of Fighters tonight. King of Fighters 98, that was great. That's pretty much it. Just want to shout out you guys, because you're cool. Go follow Dave, he's going to be doing some graphic stuff. Go follow Kay, he's going to be doing some repro and disc and ripping stuff.
And go check out the Dreamcast Talk forums as well.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got to do that. And play Dreamcast.
Hit up Patrick if you want to play some King of Fighters.
Yeah, I can take you. My team is got Benamaru, got Rio, and got my homeboy Terry. And that's my team. So you guys want to mess with in front on me? I mean, I'm right here.
In Arizona.
Yeah, come get on a plane and fight me in King of Fighters. And then fly all the way back.
Just bring a PVM so he doesn't have to ship it.
Well, I mean, I have one, so.
So to all of our 3 fans out there,
I think we lost like 5 of them.
we lost for a -2 fan. All right, well, for all -2 of you, thank you very much for listening tonight, and have a good one.
See ya.